Hello, and welcome to Solar Alberta's 2021 seminar series. Today's webinar, called Rooftop Solar 101, How It Works, What It Costs, and How You Can Get Involved. My name is Mackenzie Belders, and I'm the Executive Assistant at Solar Alberta. I would like to take a minute to acknowledge that I am hosting you today from Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including Nehewa or Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Papas Chase, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, and Métis, nations whose ancestors have cared for and nurtured those lands since time immemorial. Next slide, please. We were delighted to have had so many people register for this event. We have a strong sense that many people want to get involved in rooftop solar in Alberta. Please note that we will be recording this webinar for future distribution so that those who missed out on registering through Zoom can still participate. Today, Solar Alberta's Executive Director and our amazing volunteer and renewables consultant, Nicholas Kwong Wong, will deliver a PowerPoint presentation about rooftop solar, touching on the basics about how it works, what it costs, and how you can get involved. Following the presentation, we will be taking some time for a Q&A period in which you can all participate. And finally, at 1:15, those who wish to do so will be guided to shift over to the Zoom meeting platform for 30 minutes so that we can chat about what we learned and ask more questions of the presenters and participants. Throughout the event and after, you are encouraged to give us a shout out on social media using #SolarAlberta. Next slide. We will be using Zoom Q&A for questions rather than the chat box, so please enter your questions in the Q&A section. You should be able to click on that section in your Zoom toolbar below. You can upvote good questions that others have asked or post some of your own. The questions that are voted up will show up at the top of the list, and we will be pulling primarily from those for the moderating Q&A, as we likely won't have time for all questions. And now for a little about Solar Alberta. Did you know that this is Solar Alberta's 30th year of operation? Solar Alberta is a not-for-profit society that is dedicated to public education about renewable energy and energy efficiency. We also serve as a hub for the solar industry in Alberta. Our membership is made up of over 350 individuals and businesses. We provide a number of services, including managing a solar directory through our website, which is the most popular directory for solar energy and green building services in Alberta. In this way, we act as a bit of a bridge for installers and suppliers to connect with their customers and clients. You can see a screenshot of the directory here on this slide. We also run a number of educational programs, such as our annual solar show and many networking and outreach events. In 2021, our solar show reached people from over 60 different municipalities and counties, which you can see on this map. We are offering a few more webinars on Thursdays over the lunch hour between now and October. You can also find archived videos of our previous webinars on our website, solaralberta.ca. We are currently accepting registrations for our August 12th webinar entitled How Solar Can Participate in Alberta's Carbon Market. At this webinar, we will learn about Alberta's technology, innovation, emissions reduction regulation, and how it relates to solar. We are also currently accepting registrations for our September 16th event, which we are co-hosting with our partner, Women in Renewable Energy, entitled Mind the Gap, Best Practices to Close the Gender Gap in the Renewable Sector. We are pleased to announce that we will once again be running a number of online courses for solar industry professionals or those transitioning into the sector. Our courses are this fall on Tuesday and Thursday evenings on 3 to 5 nights over 2 to 3 weeks. Please see the registration links in the chat box for these upcoming events or find them at solaralberta.ca. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that last month, Solar Alberta won a 2021 Emerald Award in the Community Group or Nonprofit category. For 30 years, the Alberta Emerald Foundation has celebrated the outstanding environmental achievements of many individuals and organizations across Alberta. We are incredibly proud and thankful to have been recognized in this manner for the second time in our own 30-year history. We would like to take this opportunity to thank Sargent's Roofing for sponsoring this event as one of Solar Alberta's generous corporate sponsor members. We really appreciate their support. We are always interested in developing more partnerships for our events. If you or your company want to work with us to educate the public about the benefits of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate change, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you. I now have the honor of introducing our co-presenters, Heather McKenzie and Nicholas Kwong Wong. Heather came to Solar Alberta as a seasoned leader, social entrepreneur, and green business advocate. Prior to becoming the executive director of Solar Alberta, she worked as a government relations professional, ran her own business, and served as an elected trustee on the Edmonton Public School Board. She has a master's degree in international development studies and has championed grassroots community development initiatives in Alberta and around the world. She believes that investing in solar is a very concrete way that everyday Albertans can participate in Alberta's energy transition and take meaningful action on climate change. Nick is an electrical engineer currently working in the renewables consulting industry. He has over 4 years of experience in solar PV design and project management, ranging from 10 kilowatt residential rooftop systems all the way to 100 megawatt utility scale ground mount systems. He has worked on over 11 megawatts of residential and commercial microgeneration projects and over 400 megawatts of utility scale projects, including Canada's largest municipal rooftop solar PV system at Genesis Place in the city of Airdrie. In his spare time, Nick enjoys traveling, hiking, running, and biking. And now I would like to turn the mic over to Heather to begin the presentation.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Mackenzie. I appreciate the introduction. Before we get started, we're just going to take a minute to do a little poll here. I want to get a sense of who all is in the room with us. So can you please take a minute to complete this poll? And we realize you might fit a few of these categories, so just pick the one that fits you best. All right, I see the responses rolling in. Wonderful. Just about done. Quite a few of you have voted, so I appreciate that. All right, I think it's tapering off, so I think we can end that poll and show off the results. So wow, this is your first Solar Alberta event for a good 55% of you, which is actually exactly what we were hoping to accomplish today. So you have already, kindly helped us achieve our goal. We were trying to reach some new folks today. It is also exciting, of course, to see that you have that we have a few people on the line who have attended events in the past, a few members, a few volunteers, regular attendees. Thank you all for joining us. You're very welcome today. I think we should share those results so that you can all see them and you'll have an idea of who's in the room with you in this virtual room. All right, I'm going to stop sharing those and we're going to carry on with our presentation. So it's good to get a sense for who you all are and how familiar you are with our organization. Hopefully there will be a little bit of new information for all of you today. Up on the slide, you can see the presentation outline for the next 30 minutes or so. First up, Nick and I are going to talk about how solar in Alberta works. It's quite different than other provinces, so you need to kind of get a sense for our province in particular. Then we're going to talk about how solar impacts your finances and your bills, getting into some of the nitty-gritty. Then we'll discuss how to find a solar installer. Lastly, we're going to talk about how to finance your solar project, and those are items that are actually changing almost daily right now. So we're going to have some current information for you. Then we're going to dive into a formal Q&A for another half hour. And for anyone who would like an informal chat with the presenters and other attendees, at the end of the formal Q&A, we're going to post a Zoom meeting link in the chat box, and you can pop over and ask us a few more questions in that informal format. Something new we're trying today, so I hope some of you will take the leap over to the Zoom meeting with us after. Awesome. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Nick to begin explaining how rooftop solar in Alberta works.
Thanks, Heather, and welcome everyone. So before we share more broadly about the topic of solar in Alberta and get talking about more of the specifics of setting up your own solar system, we want to give you a bit more of an overview of exactly how most home and business rooftop solar arrays work in Alberta. So the first things first, what happens is that the sunlight will hit the solar modules that are installed on the roof of your home or your garage. Typically, these modules will be installed on south-facing roofs in the best case, although east and west-facing roofs can also work as an alternative option. And what these photovoltaic modules will do is that they'll convert sunlight into direct currents or DC electricity. So from this DC electricity, it'll go to a little box called your inverter, symbolized by the number 2 here. And what that will do is it'll convert DC electricity from your solar array into alternating currents or AC electricity, which is what your home uses and the grid uses. So from here, the AC electricity will feed your house's main electrical panel, which is symbolized by number 3 just over here. So from here, the electron that's generated by your solar panel can really go in one of 2 directions. So in the first case, if your house isn't consuming a lot of energy, so let's say it's 10 a.m. and nobody's home, and the solar system's producing a lot because it's sunny outside, then what will happen is that the solar electron will go out to the grid and spin your electricity meter backwards, so to speak. So what this solar electron that will go to the grid, what it'll do is it'll basically show up as a credit line on your electricity bill. So that's the first case. In your second case, if your house is consuming a lot of energy, so let's say it's 4 or 5 p.m., when everyone's home, the lights are on, you start turning on your kettles and your microwaves, what will happen is that the solar electron will be used to power the loads in your home. So while this won't show up explicitly on your electricity bill as a credit, what it will do is it'll offset a kilowatt hour or unit of energy that you would have otherwise purchased from the grid. And as such, it'll be in some sort of way a hidden savings on your electricity bill. So we'll go more into how your electricity bill is affected later in the presentation, just so you have an idea of these 2 different cases and how they show up. So one thing to note is that there's going to be a bidirectional meter or 2-directional meter marked by number 4 here, which will be supplied by your utility. So NMAX, ECPOR, ACO, or Fortis. And what this does is it'll keep track of the energy imported from the grid and the energy exported to the grid. So this is kind of the way the same way that your electricity company will bill you for your electricity consumption. They'll also keep track of your generation from your solar. So now one thing that's very important to know with these microgeneration systems, and when I say microgeneration systems, what that means is basically all rooftop solar in Alberta. Solar installers cannot size their solar PV system so it produces more energy than you consume in a year at the time that you install the system. So for instance, let's say your house consumes 5,000 kilowatt hours a year right now. You cannot install a system that's any bigger than 5,000 kilowatt hours in a year. You can install one that generates 4,000 kilowatt hours or 5,000 kilowatt hours, but you can't go past that. So what this means is that you're not allowed to build a really big solar system that's enough to charge an electric vehicle or an electric water heater that you plan to purchase in the future. Whenever a solar installer will size your system, it's always based on your present loads. So that's just one thing to keep in mind there. But that being said, you can always add to your existing solar system in the future once you purchase your electric vehicle or your electric water heaters, etc. So one last thing before we move on here is that in Alberta, your home will almost always remain connected to the utility grid. The reason for this is that it serves as essentially your battery source that'll supply you with electricity on the days when you need more power than your system produces. So for instance, at night, if it's cloudy, or during the winter. So I'll turn it back over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Nick. So now that we've had a detailed look at exactly how solar works on our homes and businesses in Alberta, we're going to share a bit of information with you about how solar arrays in Alberta work in general, the different types of arrays, and where home and business rooftop solar fit within the provincial solar picture. So let's start with a little known fun fact. Did you know that with increased demand, with technological advancements and more manufacturing of solar in recent history, we have actually seen the cost of solar modules drop by 90% in 10 years. It's quite phenomenal. And it's true. Solar and wind are now the cheapest forms of new power generation available globally without subsidy. Therefore, more and more people and companies and governments are investing in solar for economic reasons rather than purely for environmental ones. We saw the city of St. Albert actually just made a decision to make a major solar investment. Again, likely they were enjoying looking at the bottom line, and I'm sure the environmental factors were important as well. People used to see solar as a really risky investment. Nowadays, it's viewed as a very logical and necessary component of our energy sector that will only grow in terms of usage as well as market share into the future. It is very important to realize that when we talk about the recent growth in solar in Alberta, we are talking about solar PV, which means solar photovoltaic. It's not about solar thermal. Solar PV is about harnessing the sun's light, while solar thermal is about harnessing the sun's heat. Both are important technologies, but solar PV is what's actually taking off in a big way in Alberta right now. And it works very well in northern climates because solar PV actually quite likes the cold. And so you'll see that you'll hear the word PV a lot when we're talking about solar these days. There are both small solar PV microgeneration arrays that are under 150 kilowatts and large microgen solar PV systems that are often called commercial systems. And you'll see them on businesses or not-for-profits. Anything under 5 megawatts is considered microgen in Alberta. And the household system that Nick described to you in the last slide is a small residential microgen system. And of course, you can see two more of those on the pictures here on this slide. All right, let's go to the next slide. Nick, you can take it away.
Oh, put myself on mute there. Thanks, Heather.
No.
So as Heather was mentioning, you've all probably spotted a solar array or two on a home in your neighborhood or around town. But here are some large-scale microgeneration solar PV sites that have been installed around Alberta. So the first one's up in Genesis Place in the city of Airdrie. This one's installed on a recreational center. We also have the Canmore Collegiate High School. So lots of schools nowadays are also choosing to install solar. We also have Freedom Cannabis in Atchison, which is one of the largest rooftop arrays in the country. So also lots of private business investments going into solar. And finally, we have a poultry farm here in Linden. So there's actually a lot of farms and farmers looking to install solar right now for various reasons. So there's lots of different parties, lots of different types of groups who are quite interested in solar right now. So before we move on, one thing I just want to reiterate is that when it comes to microgeneration in Alberta, which is most rooftop solar, it needs to be built to a size that's equal or less to your on-site consumption. So you can see all these sites here. Obviously, for a recreational center, that's going to use a lot more electricity than your average house. And as such, we have a really big site. But for a smaller house, or let's say even this high school, it's going to be a smaller load, which is why it's a smaller system. So whenever you contact an installer, they'll help you figure out the optimal size of your system.
Great. So what we call microgen or microgeneration in Alberta has grown at an incredible rate in the last 7 years. This graph shows that we had about 5 megawatts on the grid in 2015, and that's the electricity grid. There are now over 100 megawatts of installed solar microgen capacity in Alberta, and this number is growing daily. In addition to the rapid growth shown by this graph for microgen in Alberta, you can also see that we have had more large-scale microgen installations in recent years. This is likely due to the rise in larger commercial projects, such as the ones on businesses, schools, and municipal buildings like those that Nick just recently described.
So while the microgeneration growth that Heather just mentioned is quite impressive, an even bigger story in Alberta these days is utility scale solar. And what we mean when we say utility scale solar is that essentially any system that has a capacity generates more than 5 megawatts of energy. So right now, these systems take us from about a measly 117 megawatts of solar in January 2020 to a planned 4,600 megawatts of solar in 3 years in 2023. So the difference with these utility scale solar PV systems is that they're highly regulated and it takes a lot of land and stakeholder consultations that require to be done before they're developed. So while a microgeneration system might take, the permitting for that can take anything from, a few weeks to maybe a couple of months. For these utility scale systems, they often take, 2, 3, or even more years to develop. So these utility scale systems, another difference with them is that they generate power as a commodity rather than trying to generate to offset their own consumption. So instead of trying to reduce their electrical bill, they're actually selling power as a commodity back to the grid. So they can do this either in two ways. They can either sell it back to the grid directly in the general markets, or they may also sell it to a company through something called a power purchase agreement, or a PPA that you may have heard of, such as Amazon, RBC, or Labatt. These companies have all sort of signed PPAs in Alberta for Alberta Solar projects recently. So one thing to keep in mind is that while the number of projects and the capacity on the grid that have recently been announced is really, really good and really, really high, we're leading the entire nation in terms of solar developments. It's important to kind of temper and keep in mind that right now, solar still only makes up really 2 to 3% of Alberta's electricity generation. And renewables in general really only make up 15%. So there's still a long way to go before making our electric grid net zero, but at least we're on the right path.
Great. So we've talked a bit about microgen, and we've talked a bit about utility scale generation. But it's also important to mention that in addition to microgeneration projects and utility scale solar projects, here in Alberta, there are also community solar generation projects. And this is a picture here of the Renfrew ComGen project that's taking shape in Calgary at I think it's at their science center. And so this is where a group of people can come together. They can invest in a solar development that's not on their own property. And so this approach is beginning to take off in Alberta, and a number of cooperatives and Indigenous communities are leading the charge. I know the Métis Nation of Alberta was involved in a partnership to get a nice big community solar array up at the Métis settlement. So there's lots of that starting to take shape. We're still at the sort of fledgling stages of community generation in Alberta, but this will give folks who are apartment dwellers, who are renters, others who have roofs that aren't really solar appropriate, an opportunity to participate in solar. We do have a few members in Solar Alberta who are focused on community generation, and they often call it ComGen. And you can find them in our directory on our website. And we're also planning some solar show content for February. We're developing that on the topic of ComGen as well. So if you're interested in learning more about community generation, we hope to be able to have more sessions on that in the months to come. Now, we've touched on a few of the reasons why solar is taking off generally. But when you look at how solar is taking off in Alberta specifically, you might be wondering why our province in particular. Some of the reasons that solar is taking off in Alberta specifically are that we have incredible solar generating potential. So solar energy generating potential. Look at this map here from the Government of Canada. You can see that much of Alberta and Saskatchewan are in deep orange or yellow. And that means we have incredible solar energy generating potential. And so we have this great, we're the hot spot, literally, except this is about light and it's not about heat, right? So when it comes to light, we have a lot of it. A workforce. We also have a workforce that is super keen and ready to transition. There are a lot of people that call us almost daily saying, how do I get into the solar sector? I want to shift into the solar sector. They're looking for job stability of all things, which of course, you know, in the past, people would never have looked to solar for job stability, but now that's the place to go. We also have a culture here in Alberta that really values self-sufficiency. And of course, solar is very grassroots, so it really lends itself to that independent streak we have here and that self-sufficient sort of energy independence that you always hear about culturally in Alberta. Also, coal is shutting down much sooner than expected in Alberta, so there is room for more renewable energy on the grid. And another factor, of course, that Nick touched on is that our market is different from every other province in Canada. Our market is open for private investment, our energy market, so our electricity market. This makes it relatively easy for solar businesses to set up shop and expand here compared to other jurisdictions. Those power purchase agreements, those PPAs you might hear about in the news, they're actually only possible in Alberta from a Canadian perspective. You can't actually really get away with that sort of thing elsewhere. So a lot of those things are unique to our energy market here in Alberta. Also, goal setting is important. And the government of Alberta currently has a goal to get to 30% renewables on the grid by 2030. And that helps a lot to propel the growth of solar and other renewables in the province. There are many who anticipate that bar might be raised again soon, so we'll have to wait and see. All right, Nick, I think it's time for us to transition into the fun part, depending on your perspective, the finances. So how can people save some money using solar? Let's get into the money piece.
All right, yeah. So first off, we'll start by discussing some of the broader financial considerations, and then we'll start digging in really deep into what your utility bill might look like pre-solar and post-solar. So I guess to start off with, one thing that's really important to remember is that the cost of electricity will depend on which retailer you're currently with. So there's a bunch of retailers out there, you know, Epcor, Enmax, Direct Energy, Foothills Energy Co-op, and they'll all offer different rates, either at the regulated rate option or at fixed cost or something even different for that. One tool that might be useful for the attendees today to take a look at is there's this Utilities Consumer Advocate cost comparison tool where it kind of lays out all the different retailers available in Alberta and their different rates. So just with that context, we'll jump into, okay, how does solar actually change my electricity bill? So if you put solar on your home, there's kind of two components that it'll reduce. It'll reduce the energy used, and it'll also reduce the variable components of your transmission and distribution costs. So the first part's when it reduces your energy used. With a properly sized system, over the course of the year, you'll be able to save close to 100% of the energy charge component on your electricity bill. So with what this amount is what the power company will no longer get paid, given that you're no longer making your electricity, and also the credits that you generate in the summer that'll offset your winter months when you're importing and buying electricity from your retailer. So what should happen if your rooftop space allows it, if your electrical panel space allows it, is that if you have a system that is able to offset 100% of your yearly consumption, your extra daytime production over the course of the year and over the summer should balance out over over what you use during the nighttime as well as during the winter. So that's the first component, is your electrical energy components. Now your second component is what you pay for transmission and distribution, or at least the variable aspects. It is a bit confusing, so I'll break it down a bit more here. So what transmission and distribution costs are the costs basically for the wire systems, for those big transmission lines, for the underground cables, for all those electrical infrastructure that's there. That's what you are paying for through your transmission and distribution costs. Now, the confusing part is, of those transmission and distribution costs, or T&D costs, is that there's a variable component to it that can change based on the number of kilowatt hours you use, and the fixed component, which will not change regardless of how much electricity you use in the month. So now what solar will be able to save you are the variable aspects of the transmission and distribution costs, and not the fixed. Again, the fixed costs don't really change no matter how much energy you're consuming or producing. So what this means is that solar will not necessarily completely eliminate your T&D costs. It'll get rid of a bunch of your energy costs over the course of the year. But there are some certain fees on your electrical bill that it won't be able to completely eliminate. Another elements that it won't be able to eliminate are your administrative and local access fees. Again, unfortunately, these are fixed costs related to simply being connected to the grid, and unfortunately having solar won't be able to affect them by too much. And finally, the last thing that solar won't be able to benefit you, unfortunately, is your home or water heating charges, which can be about 40% of your monthly utility bills. And this is because in Alberta, most people use natural gas for heating. And as such, installing solar is electric, so you don't really offset those natural gas greenhouse emissions there. That being said, you could move towards fully net zero by installing things like electric water heat pumps, which your solar PV system can generate electrons for, or even considering solar thermal water heating systems or geothermal energy for your home. So finally, the last thing, two more things a bit unique in the Alberta market to touch on is first off, with kind of the rules behind sizing solar systems in Alberta, you may consider, okay, as part of your home energy upgrades, you also might install a more energy efficient water heater, for instance. So one thing to consider if you want to, I shouldn't say game the system, but if you want to be more creative with the way you size your solar system, is that if you are considering both installing a solar system and doing some energy efficiency upgrades, perhaps consider doing those energy efficiency upgrades after you install your solar system, just so you have like a larger consumption that your solar installers can install to, and thus you get more solar, so that when you install more energy efficient upgrades, you end up getting more credits over the course of the year. Now, the second thing that's kind of unique that you can do is participate in something called a solar club. And what a solar club is, it's an option that some retailers offer where you can have a different electricity rates during the summer at like a higher price and a lower rates during the winter. And the reason that's beneficial is that in the summer, obviously your solar system's generating a lot of energy, so that you get more money out of exporting to the grid with the higher rate, versus in the winter, you're not generating as much, and therefore you're okay with paying a lower rate for electricity. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Heather here to present a full electricity bill.
Thank you, Nick. So we're going to do we're going to jump into a summary of 3 bills. Rather than showing you the bill itself, which can be very overwhelming, we've pulled out all the most relevant aspects of it for this summary. So these are 3 bills from the same household since January 2021. I actually called up a neighbor the other day who I saw who got solar. I said, hey, can you send me 3 bills? And he very kindly obliged. So it's very current data. I wanted you to see the before and after impacts of solar on the utility bill, and also the different impacts depending on the season. And of course, this is all going to vary from house to house, but it's nice to have a look at one of our neighbors. So first off, let's review the bill before solar. As you can see, the total electricity charge was $173.44 for 1,106 kilowatt hours used from the grid. This bill also shows distribution, transmission costs, as well as administrative and tax charges of $93.59. $79.85 of the total bill was for the electricity drawn from the grid. All right, so that's a summary of a before solar bill. Next up, we're going to review a bill after solar. It's still a winter bill, so I think this was like January and then February when they had the solar, or something like that. January, February, March. I think we had a pretty long winter this year, so there were a few different months to choose from. And in this bill, as you will see, this household, they're still a net consumer of power from the grid. So just a reminder that this bill and the summary we have made of it does not reflect the electricity produced and consumed behind the meter. The electricity produced which is also known as the electricity produced and consumed in the house. Some people call that behind the meter. So this only shows the extra energy that was not needed that went onto the grid, which was $29.48 for 353 kilowatt hours generated. And this bill shows that which was drawn from the grid, which was 699 kilowatt hours used, and that cost $58.37. On the post-solar winter bill, there is still a distribution and transmission cost, D&T they call it, plus an admin cost and a tax cost, equaling $64.33. But you will note that this has been reduced a bit from the original $93.59 before solar because of the components which are variable according to consumption. The components of transmission and distribution that are variable. There are some, as Nick mentioned, that are variable and others that are fixed. So there's a small reduction, but not a complete reduction in that portion of the bill. Therefore, the total bill equals the amount of energy put on the grid minus the amount drawn from the grid minus the admin, transmission, and distribution fees. And the total is $93.22 rather than $173.44, which they paid in January. So it's an overall savings of $80.22. So you'll see they're not making money here, but they are saving money. This is an important distinction. Some jurisdictions around the world, they allow you to size so large that you're making a lot of money. And here in Alberta, you have to size according to your consumption. So in a winter month, you'll see some savings, but you're not necessarily going to be getting a full credit. So it's important to note that this level of savings, $80 in savings, was actually recognized in a winter month when their solar generating capacity was less than it will be in the coming few months. So that's a less than optimal solar month. And now let's look at the optimal month in the next bill. So this is a bill that we got for after solar and in the springtime. In the month under question here, which I'm pretty sure was May or something like that before I grabbed the bill from my neighbor, they're now considered a net generator. So that means they are exporting more energy onto the grid than they are consuming from the grid. Again, this bill does not reflect the electricity produced and consumed behind the meter, which means that anything that was produced and then consumed in the house. You can only really know that information from various apps that your solar installer might provide for you, or by looking at the absence of energy use relative to pre-solar months. The bills you received after a solar installation from your retailer only show the extra energy that was not needed and is going onto the grid. So that here in this third bill is the $290.77 for 1,089 kilowatt hours that was generated and not used in the house. And these bills also show that which was drawn from the grid. So 740 kilowatt hours were used from the grid in the spring, because of course you're still going to be using power, when it's dark out. So inevitably you're still going to be drawing a bit from the grid. And they drew $204.08. So that's the third bill. As you can see, the energy cost is much higher per kilowatt hour for the solar in the spring. This is because of the solar club that the family is participating in. And Nick mentioned the solar club option earlier. So the homeowner basically through the solar club, they were able to choose a higher rate for the spring so that the credits would also be higher, a higher electricity rate. The solar club is an option that a number of retailers will give their customers, allowing you to shift the rate you pay from the summer to the winter months. Many installers can help you pick a retailer who offers this option, and they can actually also factor this into the rate of return calculations that installers will typically complete for you during your engagement process. As you can see, this family was paying and making approximately 8 cents per kilowatt hour in March, the winter bill. And then they switched to paying and making 27 cents per kilowatt hour in April because of the solar club option. There is still a distribution and transmission and administrative fee of $62.85, which is just pretty much unavoidable in Alberta. But as you can see, it has been reduced as it was in winter because of the components of D&T that are variable according to consumption. Distribution and transmission, D&T. When you see the credit of $290 for the electricity generated that was sent to the grid, it becomes clearer why this family decided to join the solar club and why they decided to switch their rate of payment for the summer months. They will be able to switch back again in the fall. So the total bill is a credit of $23.84, and that will be put towards future bills that they get. And then if you look at all of these factors combined, it's the equivalent of $197.28 in combined savings and credit from the pre-solar winter bill. It's quite significant. So if we average the winter and spring savings post-solar out at about $130 a month, and assume that their installation cost about $15,000 after rebates in Edmonton, it looks like this family will have saved the cost of their system in about 10 years. And their modules will likely have been warrantied for about 25 to 30 years. So that's the important piece there. Everybody always likes to ask about the return and when will you realize the return on this investment? It can take about 10 years depending on the situation you're in, but your panels will last much longer. All right, Nick, I think we have to dive into the question we get every single time we talk about solar in Alberta.
Yeah.
What about the snow, Nick?
If I had $1 for every time. So yeah, what about snow? The short answer is don't worry about it. So there's a couple of reasons behind that. So I guess first, maybe if we kind of go into the shape of this graph, what this shows is kind of a typical rooftop solar system, how it generates over the course of the year in different months. So as you can kind of expect, during the winter months, it doesn't produce a lot, but in the summer months, it produces quite a bit more. So I guess there's a couple of reasons why you don't have to worry about snow too much. First reason is that when your installer sizes your array, they'll kind of consider the facts and balance out that, you know, in your summer months, you're generating a lot more than in the winter months. So over the course of the year, they'll still try and size your system so that it offsets 100% consumption if possible. So another reason why snow doesn't worry us too much is that snow tends to happen in the winter, and in winter we tend to not get a lot of sun. And for that reason, kind of snow coincides with low generation periods. And for that reason, we tend not to worry too much about the winter production, just because if we do end up even clearing the snow, it doesn't actually give us that much more production. So another question we get a lot is that, okay, should I go up on the roof and clean off the modules, the snow from the modules myself? Generally, we wouldn't recommend this for a couple of reasons. First off, I mean, if you're really into the money, it doesn't actually end up getting you that much more for the reasons we just talked about. But secondly, and more importantly, it's quite risky to get up on the roof. And in addition, if you don't clean the modules properly with the proper I guess, brushes or the proper solutions, you may end up actually damaging. There's this anti-reflective coating on the modules that if you kind of scratch it or scrape it, your modules will actually end up being less effective. So all that's to say is generally don't worry about the snow on the modules. Just let them melt. They tend to heat up faster than the rest of your roof, so that, you know, if there's a little spot with no sun on it or with no snow on it, it'll actually start generating some electricity and it'll heat itself up and actually kind of melt off the rest of the snow. But anyways, if you take away one thing from this slide, we get really sunny summers, and don't get up on your roof to clean modules because it's just not worth it.
Too risky, too risky. All right, so here we go. Payback. We touched on it earlier, but we're going to do a general slide because I know everybody's system is a little different. So renewable energy and energy efficiency upgrades are home improvements that pay for themselves. It's important to realize these aren't just your typical investments. They are actually home improvements. So additionally, given that solar panels can last up to 40 years, they will be adding value to your home and paying for themselves by reducing your monthly electricity bills. It is important to keep all of these benefits in mind when thinking about the return on investment. Businesses will have the additional financial benefit of attracting more customers because of your green credentials. So that's another little financial incentive there. A typical home install can cost between 12 to 25,000 in Alberta, depending on the size, and it can take anywhere from 5 to 15 years to pay back, depending on whether you are able to access any rebates or affordable financing mechanisms. I'll be reviewing some of the affordable financing mechanisms a little later in the presentation. In some cases, you can begin to pay the cost of the solar installation on a monthly basis with low interest rates, while at the same time recognizing the monthly financial benefits on your bill. And in the case of one of the financing options in particular, the CEAP, Clean Energy Improvement, that I'll mention later, program, that monthly payment can also be passed on to the next homeowner if you move before you complete the payments. So there might be some additional costs if your roof or electrical wiring need to be upgraded or replaced first. I don't want to diminish those costs. Sometimes you go to do solar and you discover, we have to do the roof first or concurrently. In some cases, these costs can also be included in the affordable financing mechanism. Sometimes you can couple the roof, the electrical, and the solar together, depending on your financing tools. Installers will tell you the estimated payback time as part of the initial quote process. This is very hard to estimate. Like if people call in and ask me for an estimate, I can't tell you exactly because the installer needs to look at your particular circumstances. It can really differ significantly from region to region around the province and based on the mechanisms that you're using to finance the installation. You can improve on the estimated payback time, as Nick touched on earlier, by reducing your energy consumption after you make your purchase. So if you traditionally use a whole bunch of energy and then you get your solar array and you're suddenly inspired to be extremely efficient, theoretically you can improve your payback time. Or if you do change out your appliances after the fact or something like that, that can also help with your payback time. Additionally, the government of Alberta has actually removed the cap on electricity prices here. And so while most of us are cringing as we see the electricity rates go up in Alberta, that could result in a faster payback time for solar potentially. All right, now that we've reviewed the financial aspects, let's talk a bit about the logistics. Nick, can you share with us how you would find an installer in Alberta?
Yeah, good question. So a bit of a plug for Solar Alberta here, but the one-stop shop for finding an installer in Alberta is the Solar Alberta website at solaralberta.ca. So on the website, you'll be able to find both this Alberta Solar map as well as a directory that lists over 160 Solar Alberta business members. So there you can read about, how many other systems various companies have installed, how long they've been in business, which is important, especially if they're going to warranty your system or repair it in the future. On the website, you'll also be able to find a place where you can submit a request for proposals or quotes. And what we recommend is that you secure at least 3 different quotes from 3 different installers. You'll also want to take a look through those quotes to determine how long the warranties are for their products, as well as their general work, and then what their practices are for operations and maintenance, as well as removal of the system at the end of your life. As a note there, typically your inverters, which again is that little box that converts the electricity from DC to AC, that box is typically warranted for the manufacturer for about 10 years, while the modules themselves are manufacturer warranted for 25 to 30 years. Oftentimes on top of that, your installer will provide you with a workmanship warranty, and these can be anywhere between 2 to 5 years, but it really depends on your installer. Another thing that we typically recommend is that you request references of other systems and customers that the installers have served, as well as proof of insurance and WCB coverage. So another thing that our site can help you with is connecting you, helping you find some financing. So the financing question can be addressed in a wide variety of ways. And if you talk with any of these installers, they'll typically have some ideas on financing and how you can finance your system. So a couple of red flags that you might want to watch out for is that if installer tells you you will be completely net zero, and we're talking about both electrically and in terms of gas consumption, that may raise a red flag. Again, as we've mentioned, when it comes to microgeneration in Alberta, you're allowed to be completely net zero electrically, but again, that might not mean that you can't offset your natural gas and other greenhouse gas emissions. Another thing to watch out for is that any installers, if they tell you you won't see any charges on your utility bills again, unfortunately, this won't be the case for the reasons that Heather explained on the last slide. So again, you'll still have some charges on your bill. Your bills will just be reduced, so you'll have the savings there. And yeah, that's all I have to say. Just be careful, do some due diligence, and ask for a few different quotes.
Thanks, Nick. And I'm going to touch on financing, but I am seeing numerous people in the Q&A asking, why are you always limited to your electricity consumption? Shouldn't we be getting more solar? So I'm going to answer that question quickly before we touch on financing, because whenever Nick and I say, in Alberta, you must, or in Alberta, the rule is, what we're referencing is the government of Alberta's microgeneration regulation. So we're actually, it's not like Nick and I are setting the rules. So according to the government of Alberta, in Alberta, you may only size your system according to your consumption. It is something that is very important for people to know here. Your installers will be limited by that regulation, and you as Albertans are also limited by that regulation. So no, you can't just go and sneak up some solar after your installer's done and try and tack it on. You also need to follow the rules in Alberta. So if you don't like that rule and you want to see it changed, you can definitely chat with the government of Alberta. You can send them a letter. You can say, get rid of the cap on microgen regulation. Feel free. That's something we suggested during the consultations recently that the government was undertaking. We were saying, hey, why don't you get rid of that consumption cap on microgen under 50 kilowatts? So if it's a small system, rooftop system, hey, let people maximize their rooftop. So anyways, I see we're all thinking alike, and I just wanted to quickly address that question because everybody keeps hearing Nick and me say the rule is and you must, and I just don't want you to think that it's us dictating that rule to you. It's just unfortunately the way it is here. But hey, it could be worse. There are some provinces where you're actually not allowed to get credit back at all, and they don't do the bidirectional meter. So even though Alberta is not maybe perfect for microgen, to step up on some of the other provinces for sure. So now that folks know where they can look for an installer, some of the key things to look for, I'm going to finish off the presentation with some more dollars and cents. Okay, so how do you finance your solar project? First up, okay, there are a variety of options, of course, for financing your solar array. There's never one solution. Here are some of the ways you can go about it. You can talk to ATB, you can talk to Scotiabank, you can talk to TB, you can talk to Service Credit Union. Almost every major financial institution is offering some type of lower interest home equity bank loan or line of credit or a mortgage add-on for the purpose of solar. Sometimes you have to talk to a few people before you get the right answer because not everybody's aware of the programs that are in place. But for example, my home, we were able to tuck it into our mortgage and our mortgage broker walked us through that process. It was actually easier to get our top up on our mortgage for solar than it was for us to figure out the appliances. They were a real headache. So anyways, there you go. It's sort of like getting appliances on your mortgage. You can just tuck it in there. There are also some lease to own options with installation companies themselves. Some of the larger installers have their own lease to own programs because they actually really want you to buy their product. So they make it easier for you. Also, there are municipal rebates in some municipalities around Alberta. Edmonton, of course, people are always jealous because we still have one here while Calgary doesn't right now. Lethbridge has rebates in the Sunridge developments, Medicine Hat and Banff also. And you can find a listing of those on our website. Additionally, CMHC offers mortgage loan insurance discounts if you're investing in renewables. And of course, the big news these days, everybody's talking about it, the new federal grant. So it was recently announced from NRCan up to $5,000 for your solar array. I think you're allowed to tuck in another $1,000 if you're putting on some storage. I'd have to be corrected. I might be wrong about that, but you double check with your installer. They know all the programs that are out there. The cool thing, if you happen to live in Edmonton and some of the other municipalities with rebates, is they've negotiated with the federal government to allow for stacking. So some people in Edmonton might be able to actually rebate up to like $7,000 for their installation, which is pretty cool. I see some friends posting saying, hey, I can suddenly afford solar. So that's a nice option. And of course, if you don't have any upfront capital to put into solar, you know, you're living month to month and you have a fixed income, then there is actually a new program rolling out in a few municipalities around Alberta now. It's called CEIP, which CEIP stands for Clean Energy Improvement Program. This is Alberta's version of a program that is often called the PACE program. You might have heard of Property Assessed Clean Energy in other jurisdictions. Well, you can basically start doing that here if you live in some of the municipalities that have adopted CEIP bylaws. It is essentially low interest rate loans of up to 100% for your solar install or other energy efficiency upgrades. And it's going to be integrated into your monthly property bills. So if you've ever had one of those kind of community add-ons, you know, you got some new light fixtures and stuff and they added a little onto your property bill to pay for those over time, it's going to look like that. So they're going to have a little tack onto your property bill. The municipality is going to deal with that, and it's going to allow you to pay for your energy efficiency upgrades and solar over time. CEIP is CEIP. Oh, with CEIP, the cool thing is that you can actually include solar along with electrical upgrades, along with roof upgrades. So if you're someone who's like, I don't even know how to get started here, I need all of the above, CEIP is kind of cool because you might be able to actually do all of the above. So if you need a roof, electrical, and solar upgrade, depending on the bylaw in your municipality and then the CEIP program administrators, I think you're going to be able to do it. So double check that obviously with the administrators, but Edmonton is getting ready to launch their pilot this fall. It will be smaller now, but hopefully bigger in the future. Canmore is getting ready to roll. Devon and Rocky Mountain House are getting ready to roll. Next year, we're hoping to see Leduc, St. Albert, Hinton, Okotoks jump on board. Don't know where Calgary is going to land yet. I saw they were doing some consultations on affordable financing, so we'll see where they go. But we're keen and interested to see if those bylaws start rolling out in some of those municipalities in the months to come. These bylaws have all been enabled through the Government of Alberta's Municipal Government Act, which was recently enacted and to allow for municipalities to take this step. So it's kind of a cool opportunity here in Alberta, hoping to see a lot of that in the years to come. So for more information about financing options, you can always check out our website, solaralberta.ca. We try and keep it updated. If we're missing a financing thing though, just message us and we'll add it to the mix, because it is actually hard to keep up with the rate of change here. People are really trying to make it affordable for you all to participate. All right, Nick, next slide, and we're going to jump into some Q&A. So I think we've taken up a lot of time with our presentation, but we wanted to give you a really detailed overview. We're going to have 15 minutes now formally for the Q&A, and we're going to pull from the top of the Q&A chart. So if you like someone's question, make sure you upvote it, because we're going to go from the top. And then if you don't get your question answered, I would encourage you to join us for another half hour. We're going to touch on some of the other questions that don't get answered in a Zoom meeting room after. So please, we'll try and touch on the most significant questions now all together, and then at 1:15, we'll jump over to a Zoom meeting room to do a half-hour discussion on the other ones. Before we turn off our slide deck and jump into the Q&A, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Sargent's Roofing. Again, they provided corporate sponsorship for this event, and we really appreciate it. And oh, you're going back to the corporate sponsor logo. That's very kind of you. Nick, you're really on the ball. All right, so now, Nick, I think we could turn off our slide deck, and we'll just have our faces up there on the screen, and let's jump into the Q&A. I'm going to probably pose some of these questions to you as if I'm your moderator now. I hope you don't mind, Nick.
Sure thing.
All right. So, okay, wow, this one just got 8 votes. Holy smokes. I hadn't even read it before, so let's hope it's a good one. Jade is wondering, what are the home insurance implications of installing solar on your roof? Do you need to tell your insurance provider, and will it increase your premiums? That is an interesting question. I have solar on my roof, and I don't think it impacted my premiums, but I didn't actually take a deep dive into that. Did you, Nick?
Yeah, short answer is I actually don't know. So if you want to get the panels insured separately, like as in just your solar installation and not the rest of your home, it is an option that insurers will offer, or at least some insurers will offer. In terms of how it'll actually affect your whole house, I unfortunately am not sure. I would probably give a call to the insurer just to be certain, and just frame it as, hey, a friend of mine was just curious. It's not my house, it's on my friend's. So
well, and I would be surprised if it had a significant impact, simply because I know that there are car dealerships in southern Alberta that are literally using solar to protect their cars from hail, because a lot of the solar panels have gone through very rigorous testing, and they can withstand a lot of the extreme weather events that we're having. And so I would be surprised. If anything, I would think they should lower your insurance rates, but I would be surprised. So anyways, short answer, Nick and I don't know that. Definitely do some research into that, but definitely not something you hear a lot about, which suggests to me that it's probably not a major consideration. All right, sorry we couldn't give you the thorough goods on that one. Here we go. What is the life expectancy of current solar panel technology? How many years before efficiency starts to significantly diminish? We did touch on that in the presentation. Nick, is there anything you wanted to add there? I think that efficiency piece is interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what module manufacturers will do is it'll be kind of a linear degradation. So if in year 1 your module is rated to, let's say, 400 watts, it's expected to produce 400 watts under bright sunlight. Every year after, in the first year, it'll degrade about 2%. So in the start of year 2, it'll produce like 98% of 400 watts. And every year after, it'll degrade about 0.5% every year. So I guess to answer your question, year 1, if it's 400 watt rated panel, in year 30 or 35, which is typically what's the panels are expected to produce to, it'll be about 80-85% of the nameplate rating. So instead of a 400 watt panel, in year 30, it might be more like a 320 watts output for that. Great question.
All right. All right. We're getting into some numbers, and I imagine a few folks on the line, their eyes are sort of glazing over, but other people are just starting to perk up. So I love our audience because we get some of every different type of Albertan here. So Kyle is wondering, what are the reasons why newer installs are moving to microinverters from the traditional inverter? Good question. Again, I don't have the answer to that. Do you, Nick?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So for those of you who don't know the difference, microinverters, it basically means one small inverter unit per module, while that contrasts to the traditional or string inverters, where there might be 10 modules on a single inverter. The answer for that is it really depends. There's a few factors for that. The advantage of microinverter systems is that you end up getting a few extra percent of production from them. So they're really good in applications where you might have a lot of shading from trees. You might have different orientations on your roof. So those are some good reasons to install microinverters. The downsides, sometimes, again, it's a bit of a design consideration, is that they may require more operations and maintenance. So if you replace inverter, instead of just going to your main electrical room, you might have to go up on the roof. And another reason might be cost, is that microinverters tend to be a bit more costly. So really, it depends, and I'd highly advise that you go talk with an installer just to see, discuss the different options and see what's best when you put the numbers to paper.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Gino's wondering, what do you think about the AUC's concerns about uneconomic bypass? I am needing a little bit more information about that myself. Do you feel prepared to answer that, or should we take that to the actual meeting afterwards?
Yeah,
The
maybe
meeting room.
afterwards.
Yeah, Gino, let's pick your brain about that in the meeting afterwards, if you can join us for that, because I need to understand a little bit more about that question to answer. I know about some of the AUC's concerns, but not all of them. So it'd be helpful to get a sense of where you're headed with that question. All right, Jeffrey, any advice for sizing when your home is a new infill and you do not have historical energy use? To go from, actually, we just experienced that. So I'm in Blatchford. I don't know if you guys have heard of Blatchford. It's this new neighborhood in the middle of downtown Edmonton where the old airport used to be. There are like 30 of us living here, and about half of us are working on getting solar right now. Some people have it up front in when they buy. So their builder has already figured out approximately what the energy use is going to be, and they have a relationship with an installer, and they're getting the solar done immediately. Others, like ours, are having to figure it out after. So there are a few different tools you can use. First of all, you don't have to figure it out. Your installer is going to work on that with you, just to simplify things for you. You don't actually have to sit in your new home and like crunch those numbers. For us, what they did was they had a standard rate. So we are a new home. We had never lived in a row house before. We'd always been in an apartment. We didn't have any previous data we could draw from for our household. And so they basically gave us a standard rate for a new row house, energy efficient row house in Edmonton. And they did factor in, the fact that we have electric appliances and electric heating and stuff. So there are some factors they can take into consideration for sure. So I think we ended up with like a 7 kilowatt system. Actually, in the end, it might have gone down a bit, but it was around 6 to 7. The initial quotes were 7. I think we had landed on 6. But whereas my neighbor, whose bill you were looking at earlier, they did a different approach. They actually took, I think, their previous consumption from their previous home. I'm pretty sure they used that, and they ended up with a 10 kilowatt system. Nick, are there other ways that the installers use to determine the system for new builds? Are you aware of?
So sometimes, yeah, it'll come from the architects. Other times, they'll basically use the square footage of your house to figure out, typical kilowatt hour consumption. So yeah, it's usually done on like a typical, this house of this size will consume 5,000 kilowatt hours a year, sort of basis.
Some averages, and
Yep.
Of course, if you have a garage suite, as my neighbors do, I imagine that probably ups your consumption. And if you're plugged in already and have an EV already, then you could actually tax them on already at the front end. So lots of things that the installer will be asking you before they determine the sizing. But yeah, lots of averages that they have to work with. All right, Gino, your questions are deep. I don't know if I have all the answers, but I will try here. What are the possibilities for DERs and community generation to generate and sell renewable energy and carbon credits? Hey, we do have the answers. On August 12th, we have a whole seminar dedicated to how solar can play in the carbon market. So actually we have an entire seminar dedicated to this. So if you want to talk offsets, you want to talk credits, I would absolutely come to that. I will tell you, one of our members, Radical, is sponsoring that event. They do actually, they work as an aggregator to pull projects together for offset purposes. They have told me currently you have to be over 100 kilowatt system to participate, but they're working really hard to lower that number to allow smaller installations to participate in some of those carbon credit aggregations. Anything you wanted to add on that, Nick, or should we just tell everybody to come to August 12th because they're going to get the full meal deal on carbon credits that day?
Yeah, I think you got it. So I don't even know that much about carbon credits. So
oh, I know it's new
one.
to it's new to so many of us, but of course Alberta is like a hotspot for that because we have our tier regulation here, and so we actually have a lot of oil and gas companies looking to work with solar installers, and so yeah, definitely there's a role to play. However, it should be noted that if you're using a rebate for your solar, you will not be able to double dip. If the government is partially funding your solar through some kind of rebate program, they're not going to give you the carbon credits ever. So usually those rebates come with the understanding written in that you will not own your offset potential. So anyways, just to caution you, I would say by and large the rebates are awesome. There is one small downside, which is you wouldn't necessarily be able to participate in the offset scene. All right, so I think we have time for hopefully 2 more in this venue, and then we're going to take the questions to the dialogue in the Zoom room. Norman is wondering, do you recommend replacing shingles before installing PV? Quick answer, I think you could do it at the same time. What do you think, Nick?
Generally, I say yes, if possible. Replace your underlying roof material before you install solar, for the reason that, let's say you have like a 15 or 20-year roof that needs to be replaced anyways. If you put solar on top of that, what's going to happen is, yes, solar will kind of slow the degradation of your shingles a bit because it kind of shades it. But at the same time, you don't want to have to take off your solar, replace the roof, then put the solar back on. That's just going to add quite a bit of cost. So the ideal time to do it is right after you've replaced your roof, or soon after, rather.
Yeah, awesome. And like you'll notice our sponsor today, Sargent's Roofing, like it's really interesting. We're getting roofing companies that are also doing solar now, right? So you can actually get in Alberta people who are kind of doing both, and almost like every good installer should be able to do a roof assessment for you. If they're not including a roof assessment and they're going to put solar on your roof, you really need to question them, because they should not be throwing solar up on a roof that needs to be replaced. So, so good question there. I feel like I have asked exclusively questions from dudes, and as much as I love all the dudes, we tend to get over 80% men at our events, and I'm actually gonna cherry pick our last one here. And I can't tell from names alone. I know that's a horrible way to do it, but I'm wondering if Lauren might identify as a woman. So I'm going to pull that question up, and then we're going to answer all the rest of the questions that we can in the meeting after. So we've got a question: will the GOA put more funds for grants? So I can answer that question in brief. This government has said they're not going to be doing individual rebates again, as they were doing in the past, for homeowners. I believe the preference now is for your municipalities to adopt SEEP regulations that they have enabled, bylaws essentially. And so I think what they're essentially doing is encouraging the municipalities to make solar more affordable. And I think in so doing, they're kind of insinuating that they're probably not going to go hard again on individual household rebates. That said, you have the federal rebate in place right now for individual households. That applies to all Albertans. And interestingly enough, this past year, the government of Alberta did provide new funding, a new program for rebates on businesses. So commercial solar actually received, well, they wouldn't call it a rebate, right? But they'll call it an incentive. So the ESB, Energy Savings and Business Program. It's in the works right now through Emissions Reductions Alberta. The money for that is actually coming from the tier fund. So it's coming from private industry to fund large, big business. Carbon money is coming in and it's funding smaller business rebates. So I think that model might happen again in the future. I could see big business carbon money funding small business carbon projects. But the chances of general revenue being used again or that type of programming, hard to say. It'll also depend on whether Alberta decides to impose their own carbon tax again. Because of course we must remember the reason we had individual rebates before was because we had an Alberta run carbon tax on individuals. And the profits from that, which are not really profits, but the money from that were being used to give us rebates. When the carbon tax was cut in Alberta by the Alberta government, we lost the power to provide those rebates. So of course those went down. And now the feds have the carbon tax. So it really depends on the feds what they're going to do with that money. And if they're going to spend 10% of that in Alberta on more rebates here, we know 90% of the federal carbon tax is going back to the pockets of everyone paying it. So they only have 10% to work with. Anyways, we could talk more about that fun stuff in our meeting. Lorraine, if you wouldn't mind posting the Zoom meeting link again, here we go. So we're going to escort you all. This is our first time trying this. I want to thank everybody who joined us for this formal program. It's been awesome. This recording will be up on our website soon. You're going to be able to watch us to your heart's content. However, if you want to chat and if you've got questions in the Q&A that we couldn't get to, I love how many of you participated in that. Thank you. Let's pop on over to the Zoom meeting room. We're going to have an opportunity to talk. And if you had a question that had us beat, we'll either talk a little bit more about it in the Zoom meeting room, or we'll try and follow up with you after if you're interested. We've got a lot of experts in the organization. We can tap their shoulders after the event to pull more responses if you'd like. So thank you for attending. Let's go follow the link. If you aren't familiar with Zoom, we're going into the chat box, which you find in your toolbar. It says breakout groups. Lorraine has posted it for all of us. There's a link there. We're going to tap on that link and we're going to reconvene in a totally different format in a Zoom meeting room where we actually get to hear your beautiful voices. So thank you again. Have a great day for those of you who have to tune out now. And thank you, Nick and Mackenzie and Lorraine for helping with this great event. And we'll go to the Zoom meeting room and see you all again very soon.